Hello everybody and welcome to today's stream where we are going to discuss cognitive load. And what is cognitive load, you ask? Well, cognitive load is how much you have to use your brain to do something. And in the case of a paper, how much do you have to use your brain to read the paper? And let's be honest, most reviewers don't spend the 4 months that they have to review a paper reviewing the paper. They just do it a couple of days before, okay? And in my case, and I expect that's the case for many other people who review papers, this is probably done on 2 or 3 rounds. And basically, what the goal is of our chat today is to make sure that your reviewers read as much of the paper as possible and understand as much of your ideas as possible, okay? That's what we're doing. Because if you have, for example, a theory section that is 5 pages, which is not very long, but there are no headings, it just has a title saying literature review, theory section, or whatever, and it's 5 pages, reviewers will struggle to go through this. So this is about how do we lighten, how do we reduce the cognitive load that a reviewer needs to invest in reading your paper. And it is also about motivating the reviewer to read your paper, okay? So just think about running, right? So if you're running a long distance, right? So if you're running a short circuit and you need to do 3 turns, for me as a runner, that's easier than, I just see a straight line and I have to run through the end of that straight line. So how can you write your paper in a way that keeps reviewers engaged and motivated? First one is structure, okay? First one is structure. Now, for me, structure is about splitting page numbers. My rule is this: page and a half for the introduction, page and a half for the conclusion. That's hard. 10 pages for the theory section, 15 pages for the results, 15 pages for the discussion. Both the theory section and the discussion are split. The theory section is split in 3, and the discussion is split in 2. And you'll see that if you read most of my papers, they're all written like this. So what I do is I make the beginning of the paper very easy to read. You just sit down, pick up, and read a page and a half. I make the theory section where, I really need the reader to accept my take on the literature short. And I actually make it very short because it's 10 pages divided in 3. Normally 4-4-2, okay? 10 pages divided in 3. So, and then the discussion section has 2 big parts as well, okay? 2 big parts. These are longer, but typically my discussion section is organized around a figure, okay? So that's the second part, headings. Use headings on your paper. Use them a lot, especially when you first submit your paper in that critical version of the paper when it's going to get rejected or revised and resubmit. Use headings as much as you can. And if you read the instructions for authors of journals, they will tell you how down can you go on headings. Normally it's 3, so you can go to heading, subheading, and sub-subheading. But if it's 4, do 4, okay? So I'm going to just switch the screen. I'm going to show you a paper that I'm working on now. So let me move this to picture in picture. There you go. and this is a paper that I'm working on now. So I'll show you the discussion, okay? So this is discussion. So I have 6-1, so, and this is long, 6-2. 6-2, I divided in 6-1, and I have a subheading here. So 6, one level, 6-2, second level, 6-1, third level, and then here, you see this in bold? That's a fourth level, okay? Fourth level. So this is like if you have an outline on your paper and you see that these are still a little bit long, but imagine if they weren't here, right? It will be like a wall of text, okay? So that's the second, let's get back to you seeing me. There we go. So that's the second. Use headings and use them as much as you allowed. So in the journal I'm writing for, I'm allowed 4 levels. I use the 4 levels. Don't be afraid, okay? Don't be afraid to go to the max. Split the paper in parts, because that's what that will help reviewers feel like, you know, they don't have to read all of these pages, they don't have to read these 5 little bits of text, okay? How long is a heading? I would say 2 paragraphs or a long paragraph, that's a minimum. So obviously you don't want to do a 5 lines sub heading, but a longer paragraph or 2 shorter paragraphs, so around 7 to 10 lines, for me that's enough, okay? I'll subdivide. So structure, headings, then pacing. Pacing is huge. Pacing is huge. Maybe you've heard, you know, we have this new series from Tolkien, and maybe you've heard, or maybe you've experienced it yourself if you read Tolkien, that Tolkien goes into this, you know, 20-page descriptions of a tree leaf, right? And that's a pacing issue, right? Now, if you really love Tolkien, you know, you'll really enjoy this. This adds a lot of value to the reading, adds a lot of texture to the world, so it's very good. But you're not Tolkien, I'm not Tolkien, and your paper is not a 300-page book that people love, okay? So, pacing. And pacing to me simply means sentence complexity. Sentence complexity, okay? So we're going to open Hemingway, okay? And I'm going to paste a bit of this this section here, okay? I'll paste up to this, okay? There we go. And I know I will go to picture in picture. There we go. Okay, so as you know, Hemingway color codes sentences by their complexity. So red is bad, white is excellent, yellow is okay. Yeah? So what you want to do in Hemingway, obviously what you want is you want to reduce this number, the grade, which is a number that measures how complex is your writing. So you want to work on this, right? So 15 is actually bad for me, but it's the highest I will go, okay? But now, what you need to do is, you see, here I have a relatively complex sentence. It's very long, 5 lines, 6 lines, oops, okay? So what I do then is I move to simpler sentences. Longer sentence, simpler sentences. Longer sentence, simple sentence. Longer sentence, simple sentence. Longer, simpler, longer, simpler, longer. Very simple, very simple, very simple. Longer, okay? So just look at the pacing here. So the first thing is that I'll actually just delete this because this is the subsection, okay? So the first thing is that the longer sentences, the bulk of long complex sentences are at the beginning of the section, okay? So when I begin to read, you know, I'm more curious about what is written, I have a little bit of more energy, a little bit of more concentration. That's where I put the longer sentences. Towards the end, you see here, sort of the second half has much less longer sentences, and instead there are a lot of simpler sentences in between. And then at the end, I have let my reviewer, my reader rest here, and once they rested, I give them a double whammy of 2 long sentences. Okay, so obviously I'm not a genius. I don't write like this, right? So this is part of my paper that has been edited in Hemingway. So this part, so if you divide a section in half, the second half is where you put a lot of the work in cutting. You need to be merciless in cutting and simplifying, okay? Because people will still be patient here, so you'll see I'm still interspersing, right? So I'm not like putting a bunch of complex sentences. I'm still interspersing. But here, most of the text is complex in the first half. In the second half, most of the text is simple, okay? So this is not about what you write, what the content is about how much do you discipline yourself, how much you force yourself to have shorter sentences with shorter words in different parts of a section. So at the beginning, you can have more complex sentences. At the end, second half, you need to have simpler sentences. They need to force you. No mercy. No mercy. Okay? No mercy. Okay. So, back to, sorry about the, but you know, I think it's nice to be able to reach you guys, to reach everybody. I meant guys, which is a sexist way of addressing people, and I apologize for that. So to reach everybody in face to face. So sorry about the disc jockey screen size. Okay, so that's pacing. Okay, and if you're curious about pacing, you can there's a lot of good tips and good insights on pacing for fiction literature, because again, this is the Tolkien problem, right? You should not spend 20 pages writing about a tree, because people will get bored and they want to continue to read your book. If you look at books like Dan Brown, for example, that's when I read Dan Brown, I'm like, I feel like I'm being tricked, and I know that I'm being tricked, but I still take the bait, right? Dan Brown is one of the masters of pacing. So just see, how Dan Brown organizes the text, and especially what he writes at the end of each chapter. Okay, so there's a lot of good information here, but basically in pacing, you need variety. That's the key word for pacing. So you don't need everything to be short sentences, because that makes reading boring. You need people to, go deep into a sentence. So it's so the way I think about it's like you're diving, right? So you're diving into those ideas, and you can do a deep dive, but then you need to come to the surface for air, and then you can go down a little bit and go up, but you cannot just stay down, because you're drowned, right? In boredom, in the case of my own papers. So be mindful of this. And again, don't think that it's all about short sentences, super low readability indexes, and short paragraphs. No, it's about variety and making sure where you place the longer sentences at the beginning and where you place the shorter sentences, right? And interspersing between them. Finally, for me, a massive tool to keep to anchor my readers, my reviewers, to reduce their cognitive load, and to make sure that they understand my paper are tables and graphs. Let me see. I have the slides here now. Okay, so I'll open up this paper, one of my MS quarterly papers, and I'll just show you. Okay, so basically what I do is I end the theory section always with a figure that I actually develop through the theory section. So if you see this theory section begins with this figure and develops it until it gets to this, okay? and then in the discussion section, I expand on that figure, okay? So for the reader, they can always refer to the figure to understand what is going on, and I normally write, basically, I'll write my discussion section as a description of this figure or an explanation of this figure from left to right, because that's what it makes sense. And I'll go back to how I structure. So in my structure of the discussion section, most of it, so 10 of the 15 pages normally, are to describe this figure, and then the 5 last pages are to make sort of an abstract theoretical contribution, okay? So although I do have 10 pages, they're divided in subheadings around the figure, and they're presented in a way that makes sense. So, you know, I think it's relatively easier to follow, okay? So that's it. That's how you keep reviewers motivated, how you keep their cognitive load as low as possible through the paper. Make sure that they read things. Now, when you're telling me, well, you know, isn't this like, you know, a little bit cynical that, you know, you're doing this for reviewers? I don't say, no, it isn't, because the task of a reviewer and the task of a normal reader on your paper are very different. And just think about yourself, right? Most of you that listen to me are academics. You have written at least a master's thesis. You know, maybe some of you have reviewed at least 2 conferences. Just compare how you read papers and how you engage with papers when you're reading a paper to write and when you're reading a paper for review. I'm way more patient when I'm reading a paper to write. You know, I mean, one of my main scientific epistemological basis is Giddens. Giddens is horrible to read. Bourdieu, you know, these people have books explaining their books. I mean, they're horrible, but you know, but it's, I want to understand, I want to grasp the theory, so I invest. And it's the same thing with papers, right? So when I'm reading a paper that is at the core of something I'm writing, I'm way more patient with, you know, there are no subheadings, there are no figures, because I need to read the paper, right? I'm willing to engage with that paper. I'll read that paper multiple times. And what I want from that paper is to grasp the ideas. A reviewer is not trying to understand your paper. That's not their job. Their job is to evaluate your paper. And the way papers are read is very different when you are a reviewer. Very different, right? So for me, for example, as a reviewer, the first 2 things, I read the whole paper, obviously, but the first 2 things that I read are the discussion section to see if there's a contribution, and then the theory section. Normally, I'm relatively broadly read, so I normally have the theoretical background to understand the discussion. So when I read the theory, I'm just checking whether, you know, the authors have covered all the bases. If by any chance I get a paper in, you know, topic or field that I'm not familiar with, obviously I'll read the theory first in the discussion section because I need to be able to understand the discussion, right? But so what that means is that these sections, they can be a little bit longer and more complex because they're the first ones that I read, and but they need to be structured in a way that allow me to grasp the paper in one go, okay? Now, the introduction and conclusion are typically the last parts of the paper that I read. So, you know, I don't really want to spend, you know, to read a 5-page introduction and a 7-page conclusion, as interesting as they may be, right? Because I've already read everything else in the paper. This is the last thing. So that's why I keep them short. Now, obviously, you know, each one of us has a different writing style. So just make sure that the tips that I shared with you are aligned with your writing style. And how do you know that? How do you know that? Well, it's very easy. Read the reviews of your paper. And sometimes reviewers will say that there's something missing in the paper, and that is actually written there, or that they didn't understand something, that is confusing and it's actually explained clearly, that probably means that these things are in the middle of a paragraph, on a 4-page, part of the text with no subheadings, and normally in the middle of relatively complex sentences. Okay, so adapt this to you. But these are the mechanisms, the levers, the tools that you have. Structure of the paper, which is essentially about page length of each section of the paper and how each section is divided. The headings, which is how each section is subdivided, and these things are highlighted as an outline. Pacing is about how you distribute sentence length and complexity. More complex sentences are at the beginning, bottom middle, very simple sentences. You can have a couple of complex sentences at the end. Tables and graphs, use and abuse them in your paper. It's okay to send 7 tables and 5 graphs in the first version of your paper, okay? As long as it makes sense. If you see this paper, okay? So this is the printed version of the paper. So this is the final, okay? Final version of the paper. So you can look it up, okay? So the theory section, 1, 2, 3 figures. And this figure is misplaced. It should be like in the middle of the previous page, but it's just a pagination issue for the journal, okay? 3 figures in the theory section. Look at how long the theory section is, okay? So the theory section is half, 1, 2, 3. 3 pages, so that's probably like 7 pages in the manuscript. 7 pages, I have 3 figures. Don't be afraid to have figures in the paper to explain, okay? Discussion section, I have 2 figures. These are more complex, so I only have 2, okay? So don't be afraid to use this to anchor your reviewers and then your readers' understanding of the paper. I hope that this was helpful for everybody. I apologize not to have streamed on Tuesday. Had some very important meetings at work. We had an accreditation. But I will stream next Tuesday, and I hope to see you then. Until then, best of luck for your writing, and feel free to ask questions in the comments or suggest topics for future videos that you'd like to see. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye, and have a great weekend.